What's going on, guys? Hey, so listen, today we go over some Louis Vuitton, and this is one that I know a lot of people, not just the youngsters, but most people, when they talk about LV, talk about their citrus dominant fragrances and their aquatics and their exotics and all that. But I know this one's super popular in terms of its name recognition. It always seems to be the fragrance where people scratch their head and go, hey, I really wonder what this smells like because I think I might like it, but it is quite polarizing in the community. So strap up, grab your favorite drink, and let's go for that ride.
Okay, dinner for two. I watch that head move side to side as I let this in into the room. You are on time, let's connect minds. Trying to get into a mood. We gon' be fine. Close up the blinds, no rush. Finish the food.
All right, welcome to the Scent Bubble. I am your host for the evening. Today from the house of Louis Vuitton, we have Ombre Nomade. Now, I know without even cracking this open that this is a oud rose type of scent. And when I think of oud and roses, I'm thinking of things like mainly Maison Francis Kurkdjian, oud mood, oud silk mood, oud satin mood. There's even some rosy scents like atomic rose. Isn't really a rose oud, but still makes me think of rose. Taif, oud from Roja. There's really a lot to survey when it comes to oud and rose. Everybody from cheap to expensive, all the houses have tried it. And I'm here to see really, I'm sure a lot of you guys are watching this thinking SB is going to come in here and tell you all the clone alternatives and things like that. But what I really want to focus on is this oud rose DNA, because I feel like rose and oud is a lot like vetiver in that 80% of the fragrances in the current landscape all across the board are not that good that attempt oud and rose. It's a very delicate combination that requires a lot of balance and in a lot of cases, high-end ingredients. So even though one of the best oud rose clones, which is oud satin from Ministry of Oud, is one that I recommend quite often, there aren't very many others that I would really regard. I was actually very shocked that they achieved such an accuracy to oud satin mood. However, those are not the fragrances in question. This is Ombre Nomade, and I want to see where it stands amongst the elite in terms of oud rose fragrances, and that'll really dictate if I feel like moving to alternatives. So since this is a very popular scent, I am going to, in terms of name recognition, I'm going to load the test strip as well as skin so we can really get a thorough reading. Now, oud and rose can oftentimes be there's even a lot of like Boadicea that I think about. There's some Fragrance du Bois, I believe, that play with this DNA. And there's a couple of things, if the oud is dominant, you get a really heavy presence of funk. So I think of fragrances like oud silk mood. You can go rose dominant with fragrances like oud satin mood. Taif oud, which is very fresh. So it always seems to be, does it lean into the oud and the funk, the kind of density and the weight? Does it lean into the rose, which can be jammy, fresh rose watery, powdery, etc.? Or does it try and get somewhere in the middle where it's a very fresh middle of the road take on both ideas? And I find that when it sits in the middle, it's the safest. When it leans animalic or oudish, it tends to be for an older crowd. When it leans rosy, it really just depends on if you're a rose lover or not. It really can hit all ages. Okay, so let's do initial thoughts on test strip. A lot of people's apprehension with LV is they feel like it's overpriced. And it is in many cases. But regardless of where the price is, can you say that it is quality and it is worthy of being a fragrance that you'd have in your collection and feel special with? Because then price somewhat can go out of the window, or at least you might leave it in your consideration in terms of giving it respect for where it sits in the marketplace. Because Louis Vuitton is a prestigious brand at the end of the day. Can you go in and get a $100 LV purse? No. You know, no one's out here complaining about the price of LV bags and purses and stuff like that. The ladies just chalk it up to the game and try to get their hands on it, or they go fake. But, you know, I think in the same regard, the fragrances in LV are probably one of the cheapest things in the brand as a whole, you know, when it comes to fragrance and apparel and things like that and accessories. So I think they're fairly priced. It's just, are their juices good or are they not? And a lot of the sentiment is, well, this is good, but this isn't mind blowing. So I'm here to test that because Ombre Nomade is typically categorized as one of their more mature, considerable fragrances outside of the more playful kind of spring summer flings. So this is supposed to be a more serious romantic tone with the oud and rose. Okay, and what I can say with this is it's not the most expensive smelling scent, but they have balanced it absolutely perfectly. I get this somewhat playful, somewhat natural rose. The rose almost feels like you could feel the velvet petals. And so there's a bit of kind of a weight to the petals where they're somewhat photoreal. But there's this lift of sweetness that feels very kind of smoky balsamic, not spritzy smoky, but almost like it's a leather, like rose petals wrapped in a very thin cut of leather. I say very thin because it's not the most heaviest leather note I've ever smelled, but it's there, it's prominent, it's present, but it still maintains an airiness. So again, almost as if you cut a very thin strip of high quality, authentic leather. So you get that scent profile, but it still has a gust of air under it. You know, this is almost as if you took MFK's Oud Satin Mood, which is a very sweet, very powdery / jammy rose, and you scaled back the sweetness and the rosiness by about 50%. And then you just turned up the kind of Tom Ford, either, you know, somewhere in the middle between Tuscan leather and ombre leather. You kind of just turned that up a little bit within it. So sweetness is dialed way back. The rosiness is dialed way back, but it's still there. And then you kind of turn up the leather, the leather presence. It actually smells quite similar to Offnon's Rare Carbon, which to me is somewhat of a middle of the road between ombre leather and Tuscan leather. So I'm trying to speak in language that can identify with niche lovers and clone or cheapy lovers as well. It's very pleasant. There is somewhat of a designer-esque quality to it, but even in that, it's the upper tier designer. You know, it's the, if this was, and again, this is technically on paper a designer house, but I think people regard LV fragrances as, you know, quote unquote niche. And for those of you out there that don't know the difference, designer houses are designer companies that sell things other than fragrances. So with Louis, they sell accessories, bags, fashion, all that, and fragrance is just a part of that. And niche would be houses that specialize only in perfumery and they don't sell anything else. But in FragCom, there seems to be not as technical of a definition as that. We kind of just call designers, you know, mid-priced fragrances, and niche to be expensive, highest quality stuff, which we know that technically that's not always true. So I just wanted to make the distinction there for you guys. This feels quality-wise on par with the cream of the crop designers in my eyes, you know, such as Givenchy, such as Ferragamo. This would be slightly elevated from that. It's very light and airy. It dries down quite fast in terms of its pungency. The leather sits down. It really becomes this ambered, balsamic, slightly photoreal, powdery, slightly thick rose, you know, velvet rose petally experience, sitting on a good backbone of fresh but somewhat smoky animalic leather. And the smokiness is almost just like a tint on the leather. It's not smoky or peppery or you smell smoke. It's just kind of like a brown, dark brown tint on this fresh, airy leather. And it's not bad. You know, I feel like Ombre Nomade is LV's reply to Ombre Leather from Tom Ford. Ombre Leather feels a little bit more pungent, a little richer of an experience from a projection standpoint. This feels more casual than it. So from that standpoint, it's very wearable. But I feel like, you know, once the sweetness, because it's already not super sweet. In the air, initially, it feels sweet. And then that all kind of chills down onto the balsamic ambery leather experience. Once the fragrance really sits down, this is where I begin to see why it's very polarizing. And that's because if you're hesitant towards leather, that becomes what feels like 60-70% of the fragrance. Again, it's airy, it's fresh, it's light, but it's still a dominantly leather. You know, it's like what starts off as 60-40 in favor of the balsamic ambery rose, 60-40, 40 being the leather. It feels like on the dry down, the roles reverse and you have a leather forward, 60% kind of a smoky balsamic ambery leather, and then a back touch of this kind of slightly futuristic, comical, you know, cartoonish, but then slightly photo real, you know, rose. And so for that, I can see how that could be polarizing, because in the dry down, unless you're really a fan of leather, you might not even want to give it the time of day. I do think there are a lot of clones that tickle at this idea. So I'll give you a hypothetical. Let's say you took Oud Satin from Ministry of Oud, which is a beast mode nuclear fragrance, and you took a fragrance like Rare Carbon from Offnon, and you did 2 sprays of Rare Carbon and 1 spray of either Oud Satin or a fragrance like Club de Nuit Intense Woman, which is a somewhat noir de noir interpretation. I think you could get this scent 100%. And in fact, I think you could get this scent and you could have more performance, maybe triple the performance. This feels like it's very much super light and airy. You might think after spraying Ombre Nomade after the first hour that you accidentally bought a fake. Because even now as I sit here and I know I got this directly from them, I get the sense that the projection is almost skin scent. So from that standpoint, now again, I only sprayed it 1 time, but I get the feeling as though if I was actually wearing this, which I will wear it a lot more, I've worn it before, I would go like 10 sprays and I would wear it at night. Okay. I feel like I've said enough about the profile and some of the fragrances I think about when I smell this and alternatives and things like that. So let's really quickly, because I've kind of skipped ahead a little bit. This got a 4.27 out of 5,000 votes. So screw what SB said. This is mass appeal territory. The fragrance launched in 2018. And again, that I said that kind of tongue in cheek. I do think people are a little bit high with this rating, like on a substance. For me, this fragrance would get no more than about a 3.8 at best. But notes: agarwood oud, incense, rose, raspberry, amberwood, saffron, benzoin, birch, and geranium. The only thing I'll really say in terms of looking at this note profile is the incense is very brown and not as smoky as you would think. The raspberry plays with the rose a little bit. It feels rose dominant. I almost don't get any raspberry. The saffron is very light. It's most present in the opening and then fades off very quickly. And the geranium to me is non-existent. This is mostly oud, incense, rose, benzoin, and a leather accord that feels like is being portrayed by the oud, incense, birch combination. What do they say this fragrance is like? Okay, so Jean Lowe has a rendition of this, Oud Maracuja. So some of the Jean Lowe's, More Than Words. There's a lot of clones of this made. Not very popular names, I would say, outside of Jean Lowe. Jean Lowe is a lot of juice. I think you get 120 ml or something like that, but I know it's not going to be that accurate. I just know 80% you would be lucky to get that. Unisex fragrance, however, I feel like the only way a woman could really pull this off is in the workplace, you know? So if a secretary in a corporate building, you know, you're dressed up, you're fancy, you would kind of smell a little bit of rosy sweetness, and then almost like you had a fresh Italian handbag or, you know, satchel type of situation. I could totally see that, you know, business professional attire for a woman. But outside of that, I really don't see it being unisex at all. I totally see this as a corporate, playful business attire scent, or a business casual, or a serious restaurant date night, or drinks on the 36th floor of the building at the rooftop bar type of situation. Again, sundown after 4 p.m., little breeze. The elements would eat away at this fragrance like crazy, so not too cold, not too hot. Somewhere around 70, easy breezy. It would be a nice little slightly rich smelling casual scent. As a scent, let's go to our usual kind of 1-2. Super masculine dominant in terms of unisex. Again, women, you know where I said it would be appropriate to wear this if this was a work scent for you. It's a temperature thing, not really a season, but I think the occasion is always semi-formal and up, even when it's playful. Sprays on this, I'm going 10 plus. 10 plus. Like, I won't even count, actually. I will just keep hitting the trigger, make my wall of mist, coat the whole body, pray for the best, stay indoors as much as possible so that the air doesn't eat away at this. It is intimate. It's professionally intimate. It's not a bad fragrance. In the niche world, again, I'm aware that on paper it's designer, but I put LV in niche category because of the price and to some extent the quality. I put Ombre Nomade in my mind at around a 7. It's very average for niche. When you talk about oud rose fragrances, everything I named at the beginning of this video to me is better. I don't care if you go up to Mind Games or Nichonnet or Boadicea, Fragrance du Bois, Initio, and Maison Francis Kurkdjian, which I feel does oud rose the best because it gives you every facet of it. I think this is very below par. It would easily be a 7 amongst those fragrances that I named. If I'm being generous, maybe a very, very low 8 for me, but my heart tells me that this is a 7. Lackluster. And again, this is due to the lack of uniqueness and the lack of performance, because with a oud rose scent, you would expect to get performance. You know, I don't want a super light oud rose scent. If I'm gonna go with that, I would go with Roja, which still gives me the performance even when it's light. And by light, I don't mean light and airy as far as a profile. I mean, I don't want a oud rose scent that's only lasting me a couple of hours. What did they say on performance? It's crazy because they say that this fragrance is eternal and has enormous sillage. In fact, look at this real quick. People are going to be like, SB, you must have a fake. I promise you I don't. I promise I don't. I really think that this fragrance has been inaccurately assessed. And I get that I'm the minority here. So who am I? 5,000 people voted on this, but I really think that this is marketing. Yeah, I mean, if it's eternal and long lasting, it is at the skin scent level to me. Let's see what a couple of people said in the comments. Look, see guys, okay, this is why I'm open and honest with you guys. First comment 5 hours ago. This smells fantastic, but longevity is a real issue. About 7 hours in, and it really starts to peter out, which is fine for inexpensive fragrances, but at this price point, no. He actually said 7 hours. I would imagine 4 or 5 hours in, this is a skin scent. It says great projection here. It says absurdly powerful, impossible to ignore. Strength is nuclear, borderline hostile. One spray is plenty. No, not even. I disagree. I'm just, you know, we're already 20 minutes in and it's a LV video, so why not? Why does no one say it resembles Tom Ford Noir de Noir? Hey, I did in my review. It's not unique. Noir de Noir inspired this perfume greatly. In fact, I think Noir de Noir is better. It's just richer. Huh. One of the best rose oud combos money can buy. Right, okay. Don't overspray it. Okay, guys, so hey, listen. Maybe SB is nose blind. I did 3 sprays and it's way too much. Life-changing perfume for me. Okay, this guy said very disappointed. Yeah, I mean, here's what I might say. You know, maybe if people are familiar with the LV line, maybe this feels heavier than, you know, L'Immensité, Pacific Chill, Afternoon Swim, Imagination, you know, Meteor, stuff like that. Maybe that might be the impression. But I feel like this is very under 2 feet of projection for me. And I've worn this fragrance before. This isn't my first encounter. It has been a while since I've worn it, maybe like a year. But I wore it before I shot this video, and I'm wearing it now. And unless I'm going nose blind, I just don't feel like, you know, comparative. Now maybe it also might be like scents that I'm used to, right? Oud Satin Mood, Oud Silk Mood, Noir de Noir, you know, things like Taifa Oud. Maybe it's just I'm around beast fragrances that make this feel like a skin scent. I don't know. But all in all, I just feel like this fragrance is very average. And I think a lot of people are mesmerized by the LV logo. But maybe you just might have to watch a couple more videos. You know, when I make my reviews, I try to be so thorough that by the end of the video, you have confidence. But I'm never too pompous or is it pious is the word, or just I'm not arrogant in the way that I'm not going to be honest with you. And like I said, I showed you that it seemed that there was quite a little bit of overwhelming reviews that were against what I said, as far as the longevity was concerned and as far as it being something unique. So do your research. You know, if you trust my nose, you know, I'm definitely not lying. I'm keeping it real. And I bought a lot of LV fragrances to really come back and evaluate them, even though I've smelled them so much and I've worn them, the LV fragrances, quite a bit. I'm giving you guys the real. So you either trust my nose, or maybe with this particular fragrance, you get a sample for yourself, or you go to a Neiman's and try them, or something like that. Or sorry, an LV store. But, or maybe you just watch a couple other reviews. Maybe age has something to do with it. Maybe collector versus guy who only has a few bottles has something to do with in terms of the standard. But in terms of my standard of oud and rose, I just feel like this is all the way at the bottom of the list for me. It's well balanced. It's a good scent. I would wear it. But in terms of if it was next to all my other fragrances, it would be my last choice. In terms of my oud rose scents, Oud Satin from Ministry of Oud is better than this. Absolutely. And if you want this, you can mix oud satin and rare carbon and nail it, I think. In fact, I'm going to test that out this week and add it to my combos book if I can achieve that. Either with oud satin and rare carbon, or Club de Nuit Intense Woman and rare carbon. With that being said, guys, like, comment, and subscribe. Actually, so sorry. Let me say this real quick. Sprays on this, people are saying less than 5 sprays. I would go 10, especially if I was outdoors, but get a different, well-rounded opinion, I guess. I just feel like the projection isn't that crazy with this, so I would overspray it. I would at least go 6 to 8. Male leaning, coldish weather, breezy weather, nightlife. And you guys, I did go through the occasions alternative. Actually, I know I did answer all that stuff for you guys. The price point on this fragrance is absolutely outrageous. I'm guessing somewhere around the $400 or $500 mark. Yeah, I think it's $400 or $500. They are refillable, but the price is only like $100 to $150 off the original retail price to get it. But yeah, I think I answered everything actually. So we're going to go ahead and just say like, comment, subscribe. More importantly, turn on that notification bell. I drop videos every single day. I tried to give my due diligence to Ombre Nomade, guys. I really did. I try to be thorough, give it the benefit of the doubt, give you guys my honesty. This is just so low for me for this style. Not talking about of all fragrances in the collection. I'm talking about specifically for oud rose ideas. This is just bottom tier for me, guys. So yeah, with that being said, this was Louis Vuitton's Ombre Nomade, and 7 out of 10 for me, guys. I'm sorry. I hope I didn't let anybody down. Have a blessed week, and until next time, peace.